And your specialism is the regional office for Southern Africa, and the Indian Ocean Islands. Ms. Manzini, can you tell us first of all why it is so important that gender equity and gender equality is addressed?
Thank you very much for allowing us to be here on this interview this afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here representing UN Women. It's absolutely important for gender equality issues to be addressed in this conference and within the topic of climate change, essentially because climate change affects men and women differently. And therefore, the strategies that we come up with, whether it's for adaptation or mitigation, will also be different, making emphasis on whether we are working with men or women. And so it's absolutely important. And also when we talk about gender equality, we're actually talking about access to resources, we're talking about power relations and what influences whether men and women have access to these resources and how they use them and therefore how they benefit. So when we talk, for instance, about the issues that are coming out here, the climate fund, those are critical questions in terms of how gender equality is addressed in those agreements.
Mm-hmm. And how does climate change affect men and women differently? What are the particular aspects of that?
I'll give you one very clear example which affects a lot of women in our sub-region. A lot of women in the rural areas, because 70% of our population live in the rural areas, and at least another 70% of women provide subsistence agriculture in the rural areas. So when you have no dams, for instance, it's the women that have to go and fetch the water from very, very far off sources. And when they do that, you will find that they go very early in the morning or very late or late evening. And the likelihood of gender-based violence increases, and this is not likely to happen to men. Why? Because the social responsibility for water collection lies with women. And the same situation with firewood. So the gender dimensions are very, very clear in such situations.
And in terms of the area that you're dealing with, it's Southern Africa and the Indian Ocean Islands, what particular problems and issues do you face when addressing gender and climate change?
Well, in Southern Africa, we have a lot of humanitarian crises. And Madagascar is one of those countries, Comoros, Mozambique, in Zambia. And a lot of the time, because the women are the ones who also live more in the rural areas because their husbands or the male figures are in the cities looking for employment, it's the women that are most impacted upon because they form the majority of the population in those areas. They have to see where there's the food for the children, they have to see whether the children go to school safely. So all those elements are things that we actually deal with in terms of the work that we do. Right now what we are actually doing is we are working with ministries of environment to try and assist them to understand what these gender dimensions are and come up with gender policies for their ministries as well as the strategies. And then UN Women will assist together with the UN country team to see how they can implement those strategies.
It's quite an ambitious strategy, isn't it? Because you're not just talking about a small operation. This is huge in some societies, changing the whole way that men and women interact.
It is, absolutely. I mean, when you talk about gender equality and transforming relationships between men and women, that's attitudinal change you're talking about, and that takes many, many years to actually achieve. But you can't say because attitudinal and behavior change is something that is a process and takes very long, then you're not going to make the effort to do it. You have to put your strategies in place, you have to mobilize partnerships, you have to resource mobilize so that you can make a difference, because in actual fact, when you do implement those strategies, they do really work. They do make people's lives better. And at the end of the day, that is what we want.
And in terms of, we've talked a lot about climate change, but also energy is an important factor in this too. And is the access to energy for women around the region that you work in, is that an important factor in all of this too?
Oh, totally. It's very much of an important factor. And as I mentioned, it's the women who will have to make the food. That's the division of labor. at the household level. It's the women who are expected to go and look for firewood. It's the women who are expected to look for charcoal. And of course, in some instances, and I know in Tanzania, men now assist the women to go with their trucks, and the women put the firewood on the back of the trucks that the men own. So there is a little bit of sharing of responsibilities, but still largely it's the women who have to do that. So energy is very, very important. And what we are working with the governments in Southern Africa on is trying to motivate for renewable energy sources like solar power, like use of windmills, so that women, don't have to go such long distances, and also because of deforestation when you have to use charcoal and firewood for your household responsibilities as women. So it's very important still.
And I guess the final question, you were telling me your program has been going for about 2 years. How do you measure success? How will you measure success in the months and years to come?
Well, I mean, the very immediate success for us is that the governments are very amenable to coming up with the policies as well as the strategies, and also they have actually, many of the ones that we have, the few that we have worked with have actually costed their strategies, which means that when they do their national development plans, they are able to actually allocate resources for those strategies. That for us is an achievement. In terms of actual change on the ground and implementation of those specific strategies, as you have rightly mentioned, it's only 2 years since we've started this work, so we are hoping that due to our monitoring processes, we'll be able to actually see that the funds have been allocated to the strategies and the governments are actually implementing those strategies and therefore realizing the change on the ground.